Right, morning everybody. This is our final podcast in the series over Lockdown 2.0, and it's probably the one I've looked forward to the most, purely on the fact of black countryness of what we do, and having one of our black country role models with me today is really exciting. So, first and foremost, I'd like to introduce Pete Sturgess. Say hi,
Hi,
Pete.
Ross, and thanks for the invite. I'm really looking forward to this myself.
Brilliant. Again, thank you to BRM Solutions for helping us out with the technological side of it. And just a reminder for everyone, if you're new to these podcasts, Black Country Coach Club is there for connecting coaches in Black Country, in the grassroots or students of the game. And we kind of work to the mantra that, you know, sharing is caring. The more connected we are, the more ideas we get. So we'll make a start by going, Pete, for those who don't know, what do you do? What's your day job today?
Oh, that's a bit threatening. If anybody from the FA is listening in, I've been working from home for the last 9 months. But my job is anything to do with foundation phase children, which is children. We are just expanding the kingdom, really, and we're going to go under fives because currently there's no provision for children that young. So I'm doing some work on under fives right through to certainly 11-year-old children. So that's my domain, really, and my expertise.
Coaching of children. So you didn't wake up and get that job though. So I want to have a little chat with you about, you know, your journey a little bit and kind of how it all came about and your coaching pathway, if that's all right. So first and foremost, Pete, I know you've left us in the Black Country. Now, we don't hold that against you, but where did it all begin for you? Where are you originally from?
From the Beachdale in Walsall, and my brother and sister still live there. So I've moved away, but the rest of my family still lives there. My brother is still a Walsall fan, as am I. My grandson's still down there. He's a Walsall fan. So I've still got some really strong ties to the West Midlands and particularly Walsall. So yeah, I'm a Beachdale boy.
Well, just to test this, Pete, I hope you haven't lost your culture. Have you ever had orange chips?
Orange chips all the time. Yeah, all the time.
Well, you're back in then. You're back in. So, Walsall lad, tell us how coaching happened for you. How did you get into coaching? You know, what was the pathway into that?
Yeah, well, I wanted to play as long as possible. So my last two clubs were Halesowen Town, and then Rushall Olympic. And I finished playing around 35 for Rushall, and there was an opportunity to join their coaching staff and become, for one season, a player coach. And so that was my first introduction. So I had to quickly go through my coaching qualifications, and I got the old prelim badge. And then I was just thrust into organising coaching sessions and, you know, doing little chats with the team to try to get them motivated. And I literally was feeling my way from week to week. So when I look back now, I probably won't believe how naive I must have sounded or must have been, but it was the first steps on a really great journey, a really diverse and varied journey. So it was an important step.
Okay, so at the time then, so obviously you're a couple of years older than me, we'll put it that way. Coaching when I started,
yeah.
Thank you. Coaching when I started, kind of in the mid to late 90s, wasn't really a pathway for a job or a career. What was it similar when you started out, or what differences did you find with that?
I always, in fact, you can ask my wife that I always maintained that because I wasn't an ex-professional, that I would never get a full-time job in football, because the culture at the time seemed to be that if you were an ex-professional, you had much more a greater chance of of becoming a coach within that context than anybody from outside. And I remember doing my A license, and literally I did the pros course purely because I was working at Derby County at the time. But everything prior to that, it was always, if you're an ex-professional, stand over here. If you're a teacher or a member of the general public, stand over here. And the group was just split down the middle. I don't think it's like that now, although it does still bug me that some grassroots coaches still can't get access to our Advanced Youth Award, because I think that would be a real breeding ground for improving things within grassroots. But that's just the way it is at the moment.
Yeah, I kind of remember some experiences like that, and I kind of remember the oh, you used to play, you'll be okay, and that was kind of like at a weekend at Lilleshall back in the early 2000s. But you're right, it's very much different now, and a pathway from a coach is very open and accessible for many people now. And I think one of the good things that we could both kind of link into here is coaching just isn't about winning though. There's so much coaching for whether it be personal change or mental health, fun, community. What do you think's been some of the change over the period in your life as a coach, which is really helping community coaching now?
I don't think it's ever one single factor, but I think that we've always tried to address some of the issues around grassroots coaching, about the environment and the culture on the touchline, and I think that's still something that we're trying to improve. But I just think there's more of an understanding now that being physically active and playing sport is more than just winning on a weekend. It's about having a really strong lifelong connection with being fit, healthy, and staying involved in sport, either as a referee, an administrator, or in some capacity, even when you've stopped playing. And I think because of that greater understanding, that's beginning to influence the culture around coach education and coach development. And I think that's a really positive step.
Absolutely. I think the more people are fun, engaged, healthy, build social skills, communication, etc. The more they're going to take that into their life, really. And if we link back to yourself, from being a football player at Rushall to then coaching, what did you do next after that? Because I presume you really enjoyed the experiences and wanted more to make that your kind of your income, your career.
Yeah. I know this may not land great with a lot of the coaches out there. And I'm often asked, how do I get to get a job like yours? And for 5 years, I worked as a volunteer at Walsall's Centre of Excellence. So every year we had a new manager's bench coat, and that was all we got. I bought my own footballs. I bought my own equipment, because I was really into individual skill development of the young players, and I wanted to just try some things out with what were supposedly kids who were slightly ahead of the curve. So I offered my services at the Centre of Excellence at Walsall, and those 5 years where I didn't get paid, we turned up every Tuesday and Thursday, every weekend. We did over and above what we should have done, just because we really wanted to give these kids a great opportunity. I think that was a really important step in my learning. But I know it's not what some coaches might want to hear, because I'm saying sometimes you might have to volunteer your services for nothing to get the next step on the ladder. But it was a really enjoyable and important step in my development.
You've really underpinned what Neil Harding said, Gareth Jennings said, Rob Williams said about take the opportunities and you might not get paid, but your value might be the non-monetary things that you've learnt along the way there, and it normally pays off. And I've definitely found that in my own career too, for the guys that know me who's listening to the podcast. But in those 5 years, as you say, you might have bought some new footballs or some cones or whatever to make it work the best way that you can, really.
Yeah. See, I'm going back obviously a few years, and Chris Nichol was the manager at Walsall at the time, and he had a squash court under the main stand, and I commandeered that to do some individual work with 2, 3, maybe 4 of the young players. So we really drilled down into tight, pressurized, close control work in a very confined area to try and improve the technical ability of the young players. And I think that's where this journey of, I was after the holy grail about how can we produce players that have got the technical ability of the highest level. And it all started in a squash court sized arena under the main stand at the Bescott Stadium.
So when you say individual stuff, I presume ball mastery, technique, touch, etc. type active, like we might see now as one-to-one Zoom calls for kind of, mastering the ball type things is what you're suggesting.
It was really throwing. I mean, now there's a term for it. The term differential learning is now about really challenging your motor capabilities and the variability in your responses to certain things. And I didn't know, I was using something similar then, but now it's actually been put forward as something that's really important for foundation phase players, because it challenges their physical literacy and their physical capacities in a way that we haven't done previously. So we would use different size of balls, different weights of balls. We'd have different opponents coming in from different angles. We would get them doing something with their hands as well as their feet. So it was really challenging the players. We use the phrase just throw the kitchen sink at the players, and that's what we were doing. Although we didn't know, we couldn't base it on anything scientific. It was just something that we thought might be good for them.
Yeah. Well, I think nowadays we have there is an education thing, which is a course called multi-skills.
Yeah.
So, different fundamentals of movement rather than sport specific, which could be throw, catch, jump, reach, stretch, etc. But with different sports and activities, which may be similar to what you're describing there, and coaches listening, that is a formal qual that you can get some more education on. And I'm a firm believer in the more experience children have of fundamental movements, multi skills, playing, different activities, probably the better, fitter, healthier adults they will be, but probably better sportsmen as well.
No, it's a great point, Russ. And I think football is obviously really important if you want to become a footballer. So getting exposure to those, hours and hours and hours of both formal and informal play is really important. But in the foundation phase, having a much broader base of experiences, of movements, and all of the things you've just described, I think it's absolutely crucial, knowing that you can taper this off and begin to specialize much later on. And I'm often asked about, goalkeepers in the foundation phase. And I think all young children need to know how to throw, catch, to roll, to dive on the floor, to get up quickly, because that's all part of being physically active. So that's for all children, not just children who want to wear the gloves at the weekend.
And they probably more likely want to wear the gloves at the weekend if your training session is jump about, roll about on the mud. Everyone will want to be the keeper, as an example.
I know
different ways to do it. Yeah, definitely. Okay, so you've done your volunteering here. You're trying some new stuff, some beliefs that you have, and ball mastery activities. What next then? You've 5 years of doing that at Walsall. Where did you go next?
Well, the 5 years at Walsall, and this was part of my motivation, gave me access to the FA days that they used to run as part of the Centre of Excellence Coach Development.
Okay.
So they used to run them periodically through the season. And so suddenly I could go and watch people like John Peacock, Dick Bate, and other Martin Russell, and other people like that, so that you then see what good looks like, and then that influences you, and then you try to absorb all of that knowledge and that the techniques that they use and the approaches that they use with the players and how they coach, just so that you can become or start to become as good as you can. It was that route, Russ, that gave me the opportunity, because I really wanted to specialize in foundation phase children. I was actually asked to present on one of those days. And suddenly, once you do that, other doors might open. And it goes back to your point about take every opportunity, because you just don't know where it might lead.
Absolutely. I think the other thing that, you have said, you created a network, Pete, because you were maybe observing or talking to, connecting with other people within the industry. That network opened those doors for you, really, because they might have met you as a person and remember, or etc. Do you think network was a real key thing to that?
It was, but I'm not really very good at it. So I would go on these days with my notebook and pencil, and copiously copy all of the notes, the session, everything that the coach said, and digest it later. What I wasn't very good at was mixing with the other coaches and picking their brains. I think that came a little bit later on, because I still felt as though I was out of my depth. So I wanted to be there, but I didn't feel as though I really had a place at the table. That came a lot further down the line. And that's not to say that's how everybody will feel. But I think there was almost an aura about these people. And I'm thinking, well, I've got my face pressed against the window, but I'll never be able to get the other side of the window. Looking back, it was fascinating. But that I saw it as all part of, the journey that I was on. And it was a valuable part of the journey. And it was obviously leading me somewhere, which at the time I didn't know where, but it was all valuable experience.
So being a good learner, then, I think, is the top tip there. Conducting, turning up, taking notes, being interested. I use a phrase called being pink. So if you can be, whether that be on a course or whether that be on a CPD or whatever it is, I ask people to be pink present. So in other words, they're in the room, they're not on WhatsApp. Interested. So, you're here for a reason. How can I help with that? Neat, look after your stuff, look after my stuff. And keen, have a go, ask a question. Doesn't matter if it's wrong or right. So you were a pink learner, I think, from what you've described there.
I think so, Russ, because my experiences in school weren't great. For people who know the Beachdale, I went to Frank F. Harrison School, and the sporting side was brilliant. The academic side, it just didn't fit with where I was at that time. And so I think I had huge gaps in my ability to learn and also in my knowledge. And so I was trying to make up that ground, and using that acronym that you've just said, Russ, is a great way of describing what was probably happening with me, because I knew, sometimes when you just think there's so much that I don't actually know, and some of it I don't need to know, but there's a lot that I do need to know if I'm going to get better at doing what I want to do. And I think that really motivated me.
And maybe it was a subject you were more interested in because it was self-motivation to do it rather than you being told to. And I often have this conversation with coaches and students of school wasn't really for me. And that's fine.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes it also is a learning opportunity to say, actually, I kind of learned how not to do it, or learned what I am interested in through doing something I'm not. And sometimes seeing the negatives as a positive can kind of help out, especially, in doing something that you've got a passion for and loving, really.
I think that passion And I always knew that I really loved football. As soon as I began coaching at the Centre of Excellence, I then realised I had this huge fascination with how children learn, because what we're trying to get them to come to grips with in an invasion game is probably one of the hardest things that you can understand, because it's so random, it's so varied, and what can happen can depend on millions and millions of different things. So how do we help young children understand it to a point where they feel really confident and competent to influence and impact upon the game? And that became a huge fascination for me. And it took me that if you see it as a twin track, there was always the football knowledge that was rolling on along one of the tracks, but I went on a huge diversion to learn more about child development, cognitive development, physical development, so that I could bring the two things together at some point and become more of an authority upon, if you're working with football and you're working with children, these things might help you. So that's been the most fascinating and brilliant part of my journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think where we're leading here is you're becoming a bit more of an educator and understanding of education in its whole of how children learn, as well as coaching. So where did you go next? What was the next move in the pathway of Pete Sturgess?
I started at Derby County, and that came from John Peacock getting to know more about my work, partly because of the day that I presented on those FA coach education days, but also with links that I had at Stafford College, because my program leader at Stafford College was also one of the regional coaches that was supporting the Centres of Excellence. So he obviously saw the work that I was doing at Walsall, but also with the students at Stafford College. And unbeknown to me, he must have mentioned my progress to John Peacock. And when John got the academy director's role at Derby County, John asked me to come and look after the foundation phase and become his assistant director for all the players aged under 7 through to 14. And suddenly it was now my full-time job, and it catapulted me into a world that I just thought, wow, this is what I wanted. But there's always that doubt as to whether you're fully prepared. And I probably made more mistakes than ever during that period, but I also learned very, very quickly, which was great also.
I found, so for listeners on here, I came across Pete in kind of this time here. So in the late 90s, I probably would have been to one of these FA events or been on a course. And I always remember that the deliverers always say, feel free to come and observe us. This is where we work, etc., etc. But I can imagine that many people just never took that up. So I did, and just to paint the picture for us, I'm originally from Walsall. For those guys in Dudley, you might not know that, but I am. And I drove to Repton School, which I think was where your Derby County's training was, Pete.
Yeah.
And on a couple of occasions, I observed the session, and I would, never believe that the people I met, John Peacock and Pete Sturgess, would go, "Are you Russ? Oh, nice of you to come today." Now that blew me away. So I was like, well, how did they remember me? But little things like that passion and link for why you want to coach and how where you want to go to, really. So if any of the listeners on there and you ever link to a course or a CPD event or with others, and someone gives you an opportunity, take it as something as a two-hand things if you really want to make a difference in football or in coaching, because these networks or opportunities really do pay off. And Pete's given his example of how that is. And this is probably 20 years ago, Pete, 1998, 1999.
Yeah.
Now we've got different pathways, but very similar, and they do pay off, don't they?
No, it's a great point, Russ. And I know when I was when I was putting together the foundation phase DNA on our Hive resource. I mean, we've moved everything across to the FA boot room now, but on the Hive resource, I had this reputation for, if anyone asked a question, I would always try to answer it, because I think if someone's brave enough to either step forward and say, can I come and watch your session, or step forward and ask a question, I just think that deserves total respect from us as either tutors or coaches, you know, in at whatever level, and we should try to connect with that and answer that as much as possible, because I just think it's so important that if someone wants to learn, we have to extend that hand of friendship and that connection to them to allow that to happen.
Yeah, I think the reminder that we are actually humans, not a badge or a tracksuit, or sometimes where, you know, as you said before, pressing against the window, the other side is key. And you know, I think that personal or human approach, especially when you are maybe the educator or the person giving knowledge, has to be really humble and two ways, really. And I've really found that to help me. And I'm presuming yourself, I've learned a lot off other people who aren't, you know, maybe as experienced as me, because they've had a different way of looking at it or different examples. Have you learned off others that way yourself?
Yeah, absolutely, Russ. And it's not. We must get over this thing that you always learn from people who are operating at a higher level than you, or you know, are in a high performance environment. I learn as much from going round and watching coaches at all levels and listening to people talking about things other than football. You just gain a better knowledge about how to communicate, how to structure learning, what to prioritize, and just how to really connect and bring people on board with you. Because I think as coaches, we have a message to sell, and it might be about a whole program of development. It might be about the way that you want your team to play or the way that you want your parents to behave. But we've all got a message. And the better we are at communicating that and taking things from lots of different domains to help us do that, I think is so important.
Absolutely. So then I presume college, Derby, is the next place of Pete's journey?
Almost. I was made redundant from Derby County when a new academy manager was appointed. John actually went back to the FA to work with some of the national development teams, which was a great opportunity for John. But the new academy manager came in, didn't know me, didn't know my work, didn't know my reputation, and just made me redundant virtually within weeks. And I wanted to take offense, but I couldn't really, because I thought, this guy doesn't know me. So I don't know what he's basing the redundancy upon, other than the fact that he might have somebody else that he wants to bring in. So I found myself out of a job. And instead of living in Stafford, where I was, and commuting to Derby, we'd actually bought a house in Wigan, because that's where my wife's from. And so being made redundant just saved me a huge commute down to Derby every day from Wigan. But I found myself without a job. And so I came to Wigan, and within a very short time, I'd set up my own business, offering sport, football, obviously physical literacy activities to schools and to the general public in the evenings as part of an evening program. And I did that for 3 years. And boy, did I learn a lot, not about football, but about kids, and about kids who want to be there, kids who don't want to be there, kids who are well behaved, kids who are not well behaved. And it was just another massive step in my learning. But it was probably the most productive period of my life regarding understanding children, because I literally had a bag of footballs, some cones, some bibs, and some other equipment. And I would literally, if someone says, can you, I would say yes before I even knew what it was. And it was such a great time for my development. And I'm hoping the children of Wigan weren't too, scarred by those experiences. And I still get teenage boys who are now taller than me and more, filled out than I am, who say, "You used to take me at such a school," or "I used to come to your evening classes when I was 7." And it's the best thing because they're actually seeking me out and coming to chat to me. So that's really, really nice.
You must have done something right. I mean, I think there's nothing better than when that happens, is it? I mean, I used to do similar in West Bromwich in the mid 2000s, and you see them there as parents in Tesco.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Hi Russ, how are you? Blah blah blah. But when someone says that to you, it's brilliant, isn't it? Because they remember obviously something that was fun or
Yeah.
something that was a good memory, which is brilliant. One thing which I kind of advise some of the students on here or people who are, we have some of our grassroots coaches who want to take up coaching as a profession, and sometimes I always remind them on is not every kid you're ever going to coach if you're in a community type environment likes sport.
Yeah.
However, your job is to get them to like you, and then you've done half the battle because that personal skill is key, really.
I think it's a really important point, Russ, that the children I got were foundation phase children. We did start classes for slightly older ones as they all worked their way through, but predominantly it was young children. And that first interaction with sport and physical activity has to be a really positive and memorable one, because children of that young age tend to vote with their emotions first. And if they have a really positive engagement with sport and being active and playing with the ball and being with others, they're more likely to stay with that for the long haul. And so you can forget the football bit. If you coach in the foundation phase, you've got a much wider remit in making it fun, enjoyable, and engaging for those young children because of the lifelong benefits it might bring.
Yeah, yeah. I used to have a measure to kind of sum up that point there. So in my time in Greek Green in West Brom, some of the coaches and volunteers that work with me would go, "Kids don't want to go home," and I'd go, "Well, you've done your job well, then keep doing it."
Yeah.
Because if they don't want to go home, you've done an amazing job.
Yeah.
And that personal stuff's everything. So Wigan, then you've learned a little bit more about diversity of coaching or young people and different environments. What happened next, then, Pete? Where did you go next?
Next was a big break, really, because John Allpress, who was one of the top coaches for particularly for youth players, he invited me to be part of the youth coaches course that he was piloting down at Keele University for coaches within the professional game. And he said, "Come and work with me on it. You'll have your own group." And so suddenly it's as though all the planets were aligning, because all my teaching background, all my coach education background, and all my knowledge about practice, about structuring learning, all came together on an FA-led course that it just seemed to play right into my hands. And I remember turning up on the first Friday night, ready for the weekend course, because it was a Saturday and a Sunday. And I remember meeting John for the first time and said, "Right, John, what do you want me to do?" And he said, "Pete, I wouldn't have asked you here to work with me if I had to tell you what to do. You've got your own group. You know what the objectives of the course are. Off you go." And part of me was thinking, "Oh my God." But the other part thought, "Wow, this guy really trusts me." And this is another thing for coaches. If you can give some ownership and responsibility and convey that element of trust to your players, you might get a massive reaction back. And I'm talking about a positive reaction. So John saying that to me sticks with me. It'll stick with me forever, because this guy trusted me. He didn't really know me, but he was handing over a really valuable possession of his to me. And I just responded. I think I responded in such a positive way that it worked for both of us.
What you're describing there, Pete, is empowerment. So how someone can empower you to trust, take the lead, deliver, and it's a real key underlying principle within coaching. I think how you empower your kids or teenagers, whoever it is, to feel like they've achieved rather than just be autocratically told all the time.
Yeah,
and that feeling can be a changer in the world of confidence, self-esteem, motivation to allow you to succeed. And it definitely sounds like that experience for you then led you to greater things or more things that came in your career.
You're absolutely right, Russ. But more importantly, when someone does that to you and you see how you responded, just imagine you giving that to the players and to the children and to the young players that you're working with. And it's almost a leap of faith, isn't it? Because I grew up with a coach education program where the coach always wore the crown, and they were the font of all knowledge. If they said jump, you jumped. If they said your practice design isn't right, it wasn't right. And if they said you need to coach with your socks up, you coached with your socks up. This was the start of a really seismic change in coach education, because we were actually saying, as a coach, be prepared to hand over some of the ownership and some of the choice to the players and give the players more of a voice. And this was a critical period for me because it fitted exactly with how we wanted young children to learn and to respond and to take on board new information and become really active learners. So again, the planets were all beginning to align because coach education was changing, and the way it was structured was also altering. And I found myself, I was now beginning to become a part of that, which was great for me.
I think it was a great time, especially within my reflections of me becoming a coach, of the experience of that. I'd experienced both. I'd experienced pull your socks up, otherwise you're going to fail. And I'd then start to experience, tell me about your players. Tell me what you would do. That more ownership and engagement was key, really. So you're doing this work, Pete. It's going really well. When did futsal start?
Do you know what? I think it had always been there, because when I was a sole trader in Wigan for those 3 years, I had the franchise for the Brazilian soccer schools. And that was very, very skill based. And also that made me look at South America. And as soon as you look at South America, you're introduced to futsal. And so I began a whole new journey of investigation and research into futsal, and what it might bring to player development. I also worked for Curva for 18 months as one of their regional coaches. So again, individual skill based, but more of a structured program. So I was taking on board all of these things, some very informal in playing futsal and allowing the game to really challenge the players, some quite formal, because at the time the Curva coaching was very rigid and structured and formalized. It's now released a lot of that now and represents the game and all the randomness of it in a lot better light. So I'm really pleased about that. But I was being bombarded by all of these things, and when I joined the FA, not long after I started working on the youth coaches courses with John Allpress, I was asked to take the winners of the national futsal competition to the European Championships, because they needed a FA member of staff to go with them. And the team that won it was the Doncaster Deaf College. So I was suddenly thrust into an environment where I was dealing with players with a disability, although their futsal playing was absolutely magnificent, and I was amazed at their capabilities, bearing in mind that they had to take any hearing devices out before they played. But I also was working with their head coach, who was a signer. And John Smith was hugely influential in how you create the right environment for players. And so that began my futsal involvement. It was 2 years. The first year we went to the European Championships. The following year we went to the World Championships in Moscow to compete in the deaf tournament, and it was absolutely brilliant. And from then I was just hooked.
Wow. Yeah, but let's go back a bit. That all this kind of love for it may have started in that squash court underneath the stand at Warsaw, where you're doing like ball mastery type things, aligning in skills and footwork, which really progressed down the ladder of another 15, 20 years time to what you suggested there with futsal.
I think it was always there, Russ, yeah. And I think things have impacted upon it and almost uncovered it fully as I've just, gone along my journey. And obviously I was completely taken by the game, but more for what it could do to player development. And so having had 2 years with the deaf squad, there was a change with the head coach of the senior men's mainstream squad, and I was it must have been I was just in the right place at the right time, and I was asked to, did I want to have a go, and I would have walked there really. And so that got me into a high performance situation. And again, I was at the bottom of a steep learning curve, and you have to work very, very quickly to get to grips with high performance if you've always been involved in development. But I did find that there was a really productive middle ground where, because of our futsal ranking at the time, it was almost a development program in a high performance domain. So I think I got the best of both. And the 8 years I had with the senior men's futsal was, again, hugely productive, both for me as the coach, but for also with my player development hat on. It was also really productive. So I'm just talking to you about this, Russ, and I'm just thinking how lucky I've been.
I think effectively, all you mentioned before, the journey that you can bring other people on board is the legacy and empowerment of your work, really. And as an example, there's many a coach in the area that I work in who use futsal as part of their tools for player development. We were really lucky to have a futsal league in Dudley last year. All this stuff wouldn't have happened without the leading of it from the FA or the program that you were on. And it's not in replace of grassroots football. It's another tool to build on top of. Really, is the key
exactly
to help player development. So, well, I think that brings you to 5 to 11's DNA, and that's kind of your job role where we started. I mean, within a 45-minute period, we've gone full circle, Pete.
Yeah, and I mean it's we say to coaches how important it is to reflect, and sometimes something like this almost forces you to reflect and try to pinpoint those crucial moments of development, those light bulb moments, and I've had a couple. I had one on the A license where I was told I was having too much fun in my final assessment. And I thought, well, what is this about? And I just thought, when I was told on the A license that we know you won't coach like this with your players, and I was thinking, well, why have I just gone through 2 weeks of hell learning and adopting a methodology to pass an assessment that you're accepting that I won't use when I go back to work with my players. So does that mean it doesn't work? When you're working with players, it's just a mechanism for assessing whether you're at a certain level or not. And so that really shook me to the core, because I thought, well, I'm trying to adopt a methodology that is really effective with players, but I've just been on a course that's took me through an assessment that's now saying, but you may not use this this method or this approach entirely with your players. So that shook me to the core. And then when a young lad called Nathan Jones, age 10, tugged on my shirt sleeve, was coaching the group one night and said, Pete, this is boring, that absolutely cut me to the quick. And I suddenly realized, do you know what? I thought I knew what was best for you guys, but if you consider this boring, I've really got to change my approach. And those two things, Russell, were critical periods in my development and took me off in different directions. But I needed them, to really get me to where I wanted to go.
I think it changes your kind of your outlook or your motivations when you've had things like that. And I remember one example just to share. So back when, courses were like that, we had one example where one educator said, you're not allowed to talk to us out of the course delivery time. Yet another educator who went, yeah, no problems. We've got this period of time, reflect. Well, it was great. And I always remember and reflected from that, I never want to be like educator one.
Yeah.
But I think that was a learning moment, like you've suggested with your having too much fun. And I think you have to experience, the ups, downs. And I don't think no one's wrong. I just think everyone has their own way of putting things across. And if it's our job then as learners to go, I'm going to take that bit, but not that bit. I might do this bit, but not that bit. That's the key skill, isn't it?
Yeah, I remember doing my B license, and I actually broke my leg on the base course. Neil Aspin, who I think he used to play for Leeds United, Neil and I collided, and I broke my leg on the course. So I had to go back for my assessment 2 weeks later with a pot on my leg, and on the assessment sheet I was marked down for not doing any demonstrations. And I just thought, this is crazy. I was on crutches, but I'd gone because I wanted to do the assessment. But I was marked out, and it was almost, that there is no consideration for the learner. And I think that taught me, a big lesson about, you have to look at the audience or the learners in front of you, or the young players, the young children in front of you, and prioritize their needs, as well as, getting over your messages and your content and your knowledge, if that's what they're there for.
Yeah, rather than a one size fits all.
Yeah.
Peter, you happy to take a few questions from our audience of Black Country coaches?
I'm happy to take any really easy questions that they might have. Yes.
Well, there is no questions on here about various things that might be of national importance. So I think we can start off with, we'll start off with Tom. Tom is a coach at Kingsley, which is a club in Kings Winford. He also does what you would describe it in Wigan, called Playmakers.
Yeah.
And his question was quite simple. Win or develop? He has his own view, which he's developed, but how do you help that with parents who might not know?
Yeah, it's a great question, Tom. And I have I have really quite clear beliefs that if you are engaging in sport, then winning is important. That you can't get away from that. And you want to develop players who are competitive. But they're, when they're young, I think we have an even more important job in helping them to understand how to win, draw, or lose with respect, dignity, and sportsmanship. And I think that's my approach, certainly within the foundation phase. And I think if we get it right there, we've done a really good job, because we can produce a generation of children who are really, really competitive, but know how to lose with respect and dignity. And I think that's ultimately what we want. And I think if there's one thing that we can help the parents understand, is exactly that. But we've got to live and breathe it ourselves. And sometimes it's hard, you know, because I know when I was working in grassroots and had a team, I really wanted to win. And I wanted the players to be competitive on my behalf. But if we lost or things didn't go right, I knew that I had to display the correct kind of behaviors to send out very strong messages that we will always want to win, but it may not always be possible. And when it's not possible, we're going to behave in this way. And I think that's the biggest lesson that we can help young children and their parents understand.
The communicating of that message is the key point, I think, because now one thing I've experienced, and I share a lot with the coaches, is your parents are one of four types. Number one, they used to play, so they're going to come in with an attitude of, well, we never did this at Alzo in town. Or number two, we watch match of the day, and I'm watching Jose shouting up and down. Number three, they pay their £25 to go to Wolves, Albion, or Walsall and shout what they want. Or number four, none of the above. They might align to one of the three. So make sure you communicate what it is you're trying to do, and that then helps out with the reduced amounts of to win at cost type outbursts from parents.
Yeah. No, it's a really good summary, Russ. And we can establish that kind of culture if we're really, really clear about how to do it. And that's part of our role, Russ, you and I, in helping coaches feeling confident enough to establish that kind of dialogue with the parents and any adult who is supporting the game.
Absolutely. Wayne is the next question. Wayne is an under-9s coach from Stourbridge, also a great backcountry guy, if I'm being honest with you. And his question is, this is probably a question you've had more times than ever. He really believes his kid's being competent on the ball, but he has a dribbler. And the dribbler that he wants to do really well, but yet his other kids sometimes get frustrated with the dribbler because most people might think, is he going to pass or is he going to dribble? What's your words of advice on the dribbler?
Oh, Wayne. I think that there's two main ways that you can deal with the dribbler. You can get so preoccupied with them dribbling it, and because they're in the foundation phase, probably losing it more times than being successful, and that gets you frustrated. So you could probably worry about that and stop them dribbling. And I look at a player, and if they've got anything that appears quite natural, or they have this affinity with the ball, and just it might be subtle movements of their upper body, of their feet, of their arms, that can cause opponents real issues if they dribble at them. If I see that, I'm saying we've got to protect that, and we cannot take any of that away from you. In fact, our job is to polish that and add to it as much as possible, because that could be a real superpower. So you've got two ways of dealing with the dribbler. You can stop them and get them to pass, and then you'll never know how good they could be or how good a weapon their dribbling could be for your team. Or you can really begin to polish it and challenge them to improve it and get better and better and better. And part of that challenge to get better is to reduce the number of times that they actually lose the ball at the end of any dribble that they go on. And so I've been accused in the past that this stay on the ball mantra that we have as part of our foundation phase DNA is just licensed to hog the ball until you lose it and frustrate your teammates and everybody watching. It's absolutely not the case. There is always a decision-making element that goes at the end of every technical action. So if you're asking players to dribble, as well as concentrating upon the technical points around the dribble, you've also got to help them develop the decision-making at the end of it. so that if they have got any kind of dribbling ability, you're also helping them with the decision making at the end of it. So you get a double impact and a double positive impact, because you've considered both things. There are all these urban myths about Lionel Messi, about when he was in the foundation phase. If ever he lost the ball, the coach would stop the game and give him the ball back so that he can have another go. Now, I'm not saying we adopt that, but we've got to find a way to accommodate the players who might have this natural ability or can develop this ability, rather than just stop it right at the beginning.
Yeah, I think there's many approaches. I think that, you know, one of the consistent things, hopefully in this area, is think of a challenge. So could it be how many assists you made, or are we rewarding dribbling at the right time in the right place, and making it a positive rather than a negative? I think is something that will help out that decision making in that process.
Yeah, there is.
Right,
Oh, go on, Russ.
No, go on.
There is a game that I play, and it's 4 players on each team. There's a goal at each end, and the game starts 1v1. And you play 1v1, and whoever scores gets the ball back, but the other team get another player. So the guy who scored now plays 1 against 2. So if he's a dribbler, we're now challenging his dribbling. So he's now got to beat 2 players. So if he's a good dribbler and he beats those 2 players and scores, he gets the ball back and the other team gets another player. Eventually, he's going to reach his threshold. So he can beat 1, he can beat 2, but he can't beat 3. So the 3 get the ball and they score. So they get the ball back, but now your 1 player gets a partner. So you've now got a dribbler who understands, or is beginning to understand, that I can beat so many players, but I can't beat them all. And that's when I might need to use my partner. And it's a great game for finding out players' thresholds about, well, you might beat 1, but you can't beat 2. So that's when you need your partners. So, but it's a way of enhancing the dribbling rather than taking it away.
Yeah. What's the game called, Pete?
I haven't got a name for that, but I should give it a name, shouldn't I? Yeah.
Yeah, I know the game.
Let's call it dribble till you drop.
Yeah, dribble till you drop. Love it. Right. Question from Callum. Callum's a student. He's a student and he coaches and helps out in the foundation phase at Tiverdale. And his question is, as a young coach, what would you think would be the best piece of advice for him to learn and find his philosophy? Because he's very new into the game.
Yeah. I know there's an importance in establishing what you really stand for. But when I was really young, I didn't know what I stood for. I've almost had to discover that as you've gone down this track or this blind alley, and then you suddenly see the light, and then you follow that, and then you go down another blind alley, and then you see more light, and it takes you through, your coaching development journey. So I wouldn't be too hung up about having to define what I stand for now. I think your values and beliefs will shine through every interaction that you have with players, parents, other coaches. So if you can always be kind, considerate, and sporting, I think, and patient, and always be positive, I think that's the beginning of you developing whatever coaching philosophy you might get, because that's going to underpin every interaction that you have with the players that you coach. And I think that is what will set you apart from everybody else. And then you develop what's important for the things that you want your players to be better at, what you need them to understand, and then that will develop into more tactical and strategic things. But it all starts with what you display on a regular basis in every coaching session, in every interaction with players and parents. And that is your individual characteristics as a person.
Absolutely. I think that's really well said. Final question from the floor is from Rich. Rich has a club called FC Crystal. He coaches under 14s and he has a mini kickers session as well. So his question is, and I rung him about this question too, was I love the emphasis of on the ball, but what about off the ball? Because there's a lot of the game where we don't have the ball. What's Pete's views on that?
Do you want me to answer it in relation to 14-year-olds or the mini kickers? Because I'm happy to do both.
Why don't we go mini kickers? Because that's our theme of, the foundation phase.
If you talk about this statistic that, for in a 90-minute game, for 85 minutes, you are not in contact with the ball, that actually comes from the adult game. And we are preparing the children for that adult game. But at the moment, they might be 5 years of age. So you cannot lay that adult model over the development of young children and say, well, in your game, you're going to play for 20 minutes. And we know that you're not going to touch the ball for 19 of those minutes. What we have to say is we're going to develop you at 5 years of age so that when you do contact that ball later on as a player, when you get older, you're going to be able to do something special, magical, or inspirational with your individual possession. And it starts with you building a really secure connection with the ball when you are 5 years of age, because we want you to love having it at your feet. We want you to love having the confidence to try things so that you can be that game-changing player when in a 90-minute game, you will only be on the ball for 5 minutes, because in that 5 minutes, you're going to win us the game and you're going to win us the World Cup and you're going to do something absolutely special. But when you're 5, it has to be a different approach.
Yeah, I think well said. I think to be fair, Richie's question was one of more of devil's advocate, so we say. But absolutely, how do we help competence, confidence, ball mastery, fundamentals, etc. in that young age is key.
Yeah.
Pete, I could talk to you all day, and it's a shame that we have a window here. But I really hope you've enjoyed our conversation for the hour-ish.
Rush, you've made it so easy for me. I just feel as though we're sat in the same room having a coffee and just, chewing the fat. Really, it's been really special. Thank you.
Well, you never know, Pete. Next time we might do this in the Sadler Centre today, and we'll have ourselves some £3 chip special, and then maybe go for a pint of Banks's next time.
Oh,
Pete Sturgess, thank you for your time.
Yeah, thanks, Russ.
Highgate, no problems. And just for future stuff, Pete, resources for the England DNA 5 to 11s foundation phase. Where can people find them?
Yeah, we're migrating everything across from our Hive resource that we no longer use onto the FA boot room. The migration is taking a little bit longer than we would like, but everything that was on Hive is ultimately going to be on the boot room. So that's the place to look for it.
Okay, the FA boot room, which you'll find on your FA education on Google, plus there's a YouTube channel as well. Some great videos, top tips, advice, and lots of things about children, folks. Behaviour, motivation, communication methods, kind of the key things when interacting with. Pete Sturgess, you've been amazing. Thank you for your time. And folks listening, this was the last. I hope we don't have another lockdown for me to fill my time and not do DIY, yeah? Because really, we've had great interaction. Pete, thank you. Hopefully, we'll see you soon.
Russ, thanks a lot, mate. Take care, everyone. Bye.